After the first pilot was exfiltrated, recovering the second became necessary, leading the CIA to launch an incredible deception operation. They knew the location of this second pilot, the navigator, and they pretended he was in another area by launching a fake rescue operation on the first night to direct all the Iranian resources to the wrong area. Then, of course, the full range of American assets was involved: surveillance planes, strike assets, and of course the rescue teams. And all of this made it possible on the second night to go into the right area, to exfiltrate them while the Iranians were searching in the wrong place.
These were special forces, but also technical resources that were heavily mobilized for this operation.
There is a buildup of resources that is quite colossal. Obviously, the United States is the only country that can afford such a deployment. First of all, there are long-range detection systems, radars that can see very far, including radars that can detect movements on the ground. As soon as a vehicle moves hundreds of kilometers away, they are able to spot it. Directly in the area, there are many C-130 Hercules variants. It's a big plane. They have hundreds of them. Some, for example, are used for electronic warfare with kinds of radars on the roof, kinds of antennas that prevent any communication. The Iranians could no longer communicate with each other. Then you have ground support to prevent any movement. What we call strafing, that's what it has. Bombers like the A-10 fighter jets, combat drones that are everywhere, especially the MQ-9S. And then you have the rescue teams on site. We were talking about helicopters that are deployed by heavy transport planes like the C-130, small, highly maneuverable helicopters to fly between ridges and carry out ground attacks, and large helicopters to evacuate personnel. And then, since the large helicopters can't fly directly from Iraq, you also need refueling planes. So, it's an absolutely massive ecosystem. There are plans that have been in place for a long time. Every time a plane takes off, there are preparation teams working behind the scenes. I can explain what I experienced, for example, when we were in Chad. We were on the Atlantique too and had specific preparations for combat operations. They gave us parachutes that we didn't usually have. We had a pistol in front of us. Just to note, there were so few pistols that not everyone on the plane had one. To give you an idea of our resources in the French army then, as far as I know, it hasn't changed much. And so then there were the Americans. The difference for us was that we didn't even have helicopters big enough to carry the whole crew at once, so we knew we couldn't be rescued. That's the big difference with the Americans. They have heavy artillery, they have all the necessary resources, and they have them in large quantities. And another important aspect is the training for the crew members and the type of training that the commandos have to undergo. It's really a kind of long-term selection to be capable in all areas.
Apparently, geography was not in favor of the Americans' extremely mountainous region. We know that the pilot had to climb a ridge over 2,100 meters high, and he reportedly made contact with the American army as early as Friday. How do you, in those circumstances, avoid being detected by the enemy and make contact?
It might be an area that's difficult for an evacuation, but in this case, it may have been easier for this pilot to hide for 48 hours. Presumably, right from the beginning, his seat would transmit his location and he had the ability to communicate. He reportedly communicated with the American army, then hid in a crevice, which meant that when the American army arrived in the area, they didn't identify him right away. And what's quite surprising here and hard to explain is that the CIA sent in specific resources that were able to locate him, while the American army wasn't able to do so. Does the CIA have systems that can detect heat in an opening through the rocks while the regular army doesn't? That I can't explain.
The first pilot was rescued in broad daylight. It was Donald Trump himself who announced it. He says that's quite unusual. Why?
Generally speaking, it's true that there's a higher risk in moving this type of aircraft during the day because you need a large number of aircraft in great quantity, and they have to go very far from their base and fly at low altitude, slowly. Now the main risk for these planes, obviously, is being shot down. As we've seen, the fact that this F-15 was shot down already shows that there are still air defense systems and there are still shoulder-fired missiles. The Iranian army no longer exists from a technical armament point of view with the big radars that can shoot for dozens of kilometers. Now it's all visual. But stopping all the poor guys who have a shoulder-fired missile around them is impossible. So there's a risk of being shot at by shoulder-fired missiles and by heavy machine guns. At night, obviously, this risk is much lower, and that's why, traditionally, we usually wait for night. But if we know exactly where the first pilot is and we know he's in an environment, like a plane, for example, the chances of him being captured are very high. so they took that risk.
Does control of Iranian airspace really exist? When we see this operation that was carried out in just 48 hours, does it really exist? So,
The air supremacy that the United States acquired after almost 2 weeks is total. That's certain. The fact that the Iranians still occasionally retain some residual capability to destroy aircraft, to damage an F-35 in flight, to destroy this F-15 and also an A-10, obviously means that locally they have some limited means. And these are low-intensity, lighter means, often systems we call TV or infrared. So you have to have the target in sight. These small positions offer some protection, but overall the sky remains open to the Americans.
I'd like us to go back to this debris. This debris is extremely important, Xavier Teitelman, because the Iranians say that they are the ones who destroyed them, who recovered these pieces of debris. The Americans on their side say that they blew up these debris themselves so that no technology would fall into the hands of the Iranians.
So both are possible, of course. But in this case, the Americans are the ones who claim to have destroyed their own aircraft themselves for a good reason, which is that the planes we see here are C-130SA, meaning they are very large aircraft. Two objectives. The first is to be able to refuel the helicopters, and we know that these aircraft have been targeted, they've been fired at in the past. And the second possibility is that they landed these planes on fields, what looks almost like a field actually, in order to unload and deploy close support attack helicopters, which are called MH-6s. These small helicopters, we know they've carried out missions in the area. The problem is they don't have the range to return to safety in Iraq afterward, and they can't be refueled in flight. And so the Americans deliberately destroyed these two helicopters themselves because this aircraft we see here was no longer able to take off again. Was it damaged during its landing? Did its landing gear break when it made its assault landing on an unprepared field? That we can't explain. The reality is that in any case, all the American equipment that will remain on site could potentially be used in two ways by Iranian propaganda, which will obviously display it just like the Serbs did with the F-117 when they shot down the American stealth aircraft. And of course, there are technical elements as well. We're not dealing with highly sensitive stealth aircraft here, but nevertheless, you have encryption systems, you have electronic warfare systems, you have radios, and you have encryption keys that are normally supposed to self-destruct. You never know, so it's best to destroy the modem and hope nothing can be recovered. It could be sent to Russia or China for analysis.
The Israelis are very familiar with these operations. Xavier Teitelman, when it comes to retrieving soldiers from enemy territory, how strong was the coordination?
We don't know for sure today, but Israelis are very present in the region, especially with special forces and intelligence gathering through a network that is far more extensive than the Americans. The Americans have signals intelligence, the elements, the exchanges, the interceptions, the communications that happen by phone and by internet. And the Israelis really have networks that they've managed to build, especially within Kurdish opposition groups. And in this area with Arab minorities who are in this desert and in these mountains. And maybe they also have the ability to provide intelligence to the Americans. Afterward, the Americans and Israelis work in full coordination on actual operational support for ground operations. In this case, if they need ground support, there are planes flying that can be diverted from their traditional mission, which is called Broken Arrow. When there is a ground operation and there are bombing missions going far away, the Americans can divert all the planned missions to come and provide ground support, specifically to prevent the capture of a pilot. Israeli planes might have participated under these conditions. But overall, you have to understand that in an operation planned like this, the Americans already have very significant resources that they can deploy specifically. Maybe some intelligence support at times, but I'm not sure Israelis actually took part.
Donald Trump admitted something very important tonight. He said that the initial plan was actually to arm the Kurds, and that the Kurds certainly kept the weapons he sent. He said, "We sent weapons through the Kurds, and I think the Kurds took the weapons," Xavier Stolman.
But already it's awkward for the Kurds. Apparently, it was the Iraqi Kurds who received these weapons. There are two Kurdish factions in Iraq. One is very friendly with Iran and the other doesn't like them. Did they give it to the right faction to get it through already?
I hope the intelligence level is high enough to do it.
We've already bombed Chinese embassies by accident. But anyway, generally speaking, it's possible they were keeping them. It's possible they got the group wrong. It's possible that these groups are ultimately affiliated with other units. And it's possible that they don't want to endanger their Kurdish brothers on the Iranian side by giving them weapons that would make them targets. And the simple fact that now Donald Trump is accusing them actually makes the Kurds targets for the group. well, for the Iranian authorities, and that obviously puts them in danger. Now, that was one plan. Overthrowing the authorities by simply killing the Ayatollah obviously wasn't going to work, but having internal opposition, relying on all those young people who were protesting, who unfortunately have all been killed, so they're no longer there to do it, relying on the different opposition groups, the tribal ethnic groups, that could have eventually brought down the government. Currently, there's no plan, rebellion, or organized opposition. Unfortunately, I don't think this will lead anywhere. What is also striking is the huge gap between the military's overwhelming technical capabilities. They have absolutely incredible training, enormous resources, and operational performance, and the obvious lack of preparation from the general staff, at the strategic level, at the political level. They hadn't anticipated, they weren't technically ready to intercept the Shahed, they hadn't prepared. They might close the Strait of Hormuz, so more resources must be sent. And Trump's unpredictable tweets change everything overnight.
The president of the Iranian parliament, Mr. Ghalibaf, who had been suggested as someone you could talk to during these negotiations, tells Trump that the whole region will burn because of him. Look at these images from Siavosh Ghazi tonight in Iran, especially this poster in the streets of Tehran. On this poster, it says in Persian, "The Persian Gulf is our battlefield." They understand that well. How far can the Iranians go? That's the question, Titleman.
The Iranians, as long as the regime doesn't collapse, will have no reason to lift these blockades. It's simple, inexpensive, and strains the world economy, especially U.S. allies in the region.
For now, isn't it mined?
It's not mined, but any approaching ship risks missile attacks, since missiles are launched from small trucks stationed dozens of kilometers inland. The targeting capability, it's really not that complicated to have someone on the coast who can illuminate the target either with a laser or with a radar to designate it. The missile is launched, and 40 seconds later the truck is moved, so we don't have the ability to destroy them or identify them in real time. So blocking the strait doesn't require laying mines, especially since it allows the Iranians to extort those who are willing to pay the $2 million to pass through. It brings them money, gives them leverage, and lets them choose their allies.
But when Thomas was talking about ground defenses in the Persian Gulf, in the Gulf countries, there's a difference between defense and getting involved in the fight with armies that haven't seen combat in years.
Especially not under these conditions. Indeed, air defense has an interception rate against ballistic missiles that must be around 95%. So the vast majority of what is launched by Iran is intercepted, but some of the attacks are with Shahed kamikaze drones, which only have a 60% interception rate. So 40% of the lighter, cheaper, less valuable systems manage to get through, which is why there is a call for the Ukrainians who are trying to deploy in the area at an accelerated pace to improve the ability to defend themselves. And indeed now switching to an offensive mode to be able to reopen the strait. That means constantly having MQ-9 combat drones, helicopters, and fighter jets patrolling along the coast for, as soon as there's a slightly suspicious truck, they monitor it, open the back, and if they see it's a missile, they destroy it instantly. And it's only at this cost, with constant aerial presence over the entire fleet and the whole area, that they'll be able to try to reopen the strait, but it's enormous.
Gulf countries are still continuously being hit today with strikes on Kuwait, but also in Bahrain. It hasn't stopped.
Iran, it's said that about 60% of their launchers have been destroyed, but you have to understand that Iranian launchers are trucks that move around, come out for a few minutes to fire, and then go back into hiding. This makes detection and identification impossible since you can't eliminate the whole country and every moving truck. It's estimated that there are between 1,000 and 2,000 ballistic missiles left, which means that by launching 30 to 40 per day, they could keep firing for months and months. And what's most surprising is that the Iranians started with their least advanced missiles. So that means the Gulf countries fired 800 Patriot interceptor missiles in the first 3 days. So today there are still highly sophisticated systems remaining, and unfortunately they will remain capable of firing for a long time.